Welcome to Pop Crime TV's The Outlier podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Conlin, and today we're going to dive back in to the Utah ritualistic abuse scandal, and we're going to cover a plethora of topics today. And side note, Fox 13 covered Hamblin's American Fork case being dismissed, as well as the status of the San Pete case, as did ABC4 and a few other local outlets. So I'm not sure if that's good or bad. They jump on covering the fact that the case was dropped. I guess all press is good press, but we'll see if they stick with the coverage. But first, I want to remind everyone that after Hamblin's 2022 arrest, the Utah County Sheriff's Office received over 130 potential victims and survivors of ritualistic abuse and referred to those cases, or a majority of those cases, as, quote, being credible. I say this and remind people of this because somehow lawmakers in Utah still do not believe this exists. Cindy Metcalf, the executive director of an anti-human trafficking nonprofit called Relentless Hope, testified back when the bill was being considered that she and her partners have, quote, interviewed over 190 survivors of ritual abuse. The vote to, quote, favorably recommend the bill was nearly unanimous back in 2024. And I found this piece of information. Only one representative, Rep. Brian King, who was a Democrat from Salt Lake City, voted against the bill. He said he's not quite there on ritual abuse yet. He wants more research. He wants more information. But I have to wonder, did he do his own homework? Because there is a lot of research out there and there is a lot of information out there. My gosh, over the last few decades between Glenn Pace and his research and his memo and whistleblower Goel and the book Paper Dolls, Healing from Sexual Abuse in Mormon Neighborhoods and the prosecution and conviction of Warren Jeffs and so much more. It just seems to be fallen on deaf ears. And I continue to be heartbroken over what is going on in the Hamblin case. From the 18 charges being dropped in 2014 because not enough evidence to 2025 when there's evidence that was allegedly hidden, possible police or prosecutor misconduct after X many years to even get to the point of a pretrial or status hearing. I mean, what is wrong with this picture? And I'm a total outsider here. I'll remind you all, I cover a lot of cases and a lot of trials. And from an outside perspective, something stinks here. I do not believe in coincidences, and it seems to be very coincidental that all of these issues keep popping up in the case of David Lee Hamblin. And this is really interesting. David Leavitt, former disgraced Utah County prosecutor, now castle renovator in Scotland, is set to appear before the Utah Supreme Court on Friday, February 28th, in a case in which he filed against the Office of Professional Conduct, which is the group responsible for disciplining Utah attorneys who break ethical rules. And this is pertaining to a case or something that happened with Leavitt in a double murder case in 2019. I'm not sure all of the details, but I will get them and I will report what happens after this February 28th hearing. But Leavitt will be represented by two lawyers from the Appellate Group LLC, while Michelle R. Daniels and Christine T. Greenwood will argue on the other side when they face off on Friday at 10 a.m. But according to those that are familiar with the Office of Professional Conduct, they don't actually dig into the misconduct. They take fully substantiated complaints and then decide on the discipline from there. So if you're filing a complaint, you have to do all of the heavy lifting yourself. So again, I'm unsure of all the details of Leavitt's complaint. This case is not public record or available on the Utah Exchange, and I don't particularly understand why this is not public, but I will try to keep my finger on the pulse. It just seems like David Leavitt plays by his own rules here. I also want to provide clarity on something that I reported on. I believe it was the first or second episode on Utah, but I had briefly discussed Leavitt's 2017 tribal adoption scandal, where he was accused of using a quote strategy, or you and I may refer to it as an alleged bribe, involving the sale of buffalo meat to Ukraine, in which Leavitt would facilitate between Ukraine and the tribal land. And this would reportedly help him sidestep the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is a federal law meant to keep Native children within their communities. However, Leavitt figured out how to make this work. Now, the Native child's biological mother voluntarily relinquished her rights. Why? I don't know. Was she allegedly offered something? I have no idea. But the biological father did not. And shocker, things went in the favor of David Leavitt. So when David Leavitt did a 2020 interview for a documentary, he described this buffalo meat Ukraine exchange, and the video was submitted to Homeland Security as part of a human trafficking probe. But HSI was abruptly pulled from the case just 5 months later. And I believe I had initially reported that it was because of COVID and people were reassigned. And maybe, yeah, that was the case. But after digging a bit further and realizing that David Leavitt seems to always skirt around something that someone else would get in trouble for, I believe that maybe he pulled some strings here. And again, that's my speculation, but the man seems very untouchable. And Noel Ingalls, a former HSI analyst, later even filed a whistleblower complaint alleging that their investigation into Leavitt's alleged involvement in child trafficking was improperly shut down. And as of 2022, the case was under review by the U.S. Office of Special Counsel. And I'm not sure if it's still under review, but David Leavitt has always denied any wrongdoing. And I'm actually going to play a clip from Fox 13's 2022 investigation into this, with clips of Leavitt speaking about this topic from the 2020 doc. And again, this is Adam Herbitz's work from Fox 13.
There's such a prejudice in the Native community about a non-Native adopting a Native.
This is not how you adopt a child. This is how you procure a child.
The Fox 13 News investigative team has obtained video of Utah County Attorney David Leavitt talking about how he adopted a Native American child.
The video shows Leavitt explaining how he tried to broker a deal with the tribe in Montana, offering them the ability to export buffalo meat to Ukraine as part of a request he made at the same time to adopt the child.
Fox 13 News investigative reporter Adam Herbitz's found out why the statements made in this video are part of a long-standing criminal investigation.
The Tribal Social Services looked at us and said, "We're not giving you this baby."
This video was recorded by a documentarian in 2020. It's 17 minutes long, and it shows Utah County Attorney David Leavitt telling the story of how he managed to adopt a tribal infant in 2017.
And finally, this strategy comes into my head. And if you got 5 minutes, I'll tell you the story.
As he describes it, his strategy meant hopping on a plane to Montana, then walking on to the reservation unscheduled to meet with the president of the Northern Cheyenne tribe.
I said, I'm here for two reasons. I said, I'm here to tell you the second reason first, but I'll tell you the first reason second. And I said, but before I tell you the second reason, I want to tell you a story.
His story touches on the importance of family. Then it highlights his close friendship with former Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko.
Viktor and I have this goal of introducing buffalo into Western Ukraine. And you're a sovereign nation, and you have a buffalo herd, and Ukraine is a sovereign nation, and it doesn't have a buffalo herd, but it wants one. And so I'm here to try and see if we can form a bilateral agreement between the people of the Northern Cheyenne and the people of Ukraine to introduce buffalo to Western Ukraine. And at that point, he was all ears.
I bet.
And I said, that's the second reason why I'm here. The first reason why I'm here is this, that we want to adopt one of your people.
He says tribal president Jace Kilsback gave his blessing, but tribal social services did not. So Leavitt went back to the president to try again. Watch and listen to how he describes the tribal president made a compelling argument to help Leavitt clear that final hurdle and take home the child that same day.
He said, listen, the Leavitts are friends of the tribe. They're assets to the tribe for more than just this. I left, and 5 minutes later, the phone rang, and it was the social worker saying, I think I figured out a way to get this child to you.
Jace Kilsback has declined to comment. At the time of this interview, he was in prison for fraud in an unrelated case.
Not every child needs to grow up in the city, green grass, white picket fence house.
And I'll stop the report right there. But I think that for anyone who hasn't heard this clip, particularly from Fox 13, it really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And man, I mean, can you imagine? I am shocked and horrified that a father, a biological father of a child who does not relinquish rights of said child, but someone comes in who happens to be in a position of power, they can just skirt around the law and take this child from their father? I mean, look, I don't have all of the details about the father or the mother of the child. I mean, are there things I don't know? Possibly, but from the outside looking in, this seems wrong. It seems so wrong. And you'll see something about me is I am not afraid to say when I'm wrong. I'm not afraid to say, okay, I reported on this, but after doing some more digging and finding out this information, I've changed my mind. If I am presented evidence and it's evidence I haven't seen before, then yes, I will take that into consideration. And again, I am not too proud to step up and say, oh boy, I was wrong about this. So that's why I encourage anyone who has any information to send it over to me, because there's so much that I don't know. And I've said it before, but I'm an outsider looking in. So yes, it seemed like Noel Ingalls was onto something. Did David Leavitt allegedly pull some strings here to get HSI off his back? I mean, something to think about is, how connected is Leavitt? Truly, how connected is he, and how deep does all of this go? I will put a pin in that for today, but I also want to bring to your attention an article from the Sanpete Messenger that was released on 2/21/25, just a few days after the American Fork case against David Lee Hamblin, which arguably involved alleged ritualistic abuse, had been dropped. And the piece is titled, quote, "No Checks Against False Claims by Internet Warriors." And as a quick side note, I did see that the Sanpete Messenger filed a request for the audio in the TS or Sanpete pretrial hearing. And you'll see in a minute when you hear this article, but they seem to err on the side of these allegations are BS. So I wonder what kind of story they're planning with this audio. Is it just going to be a typical run-of-the-mill report, or is it going to be something more opinion-related? I'm curious. But back to the piece, the 221 piece. So it focuses on a couple, Joe and Lee Benion, and the Benions, I guess, are prominent members of the Spring City, Utah community, and they were also one of the many people or couples named in the 2012 victim impact statement from David Lee Hamblin's daughters. So the article goes into the Benions in the community and then details how they've been harassed following the private Substack regarding the investigations into ritual abuse by a man who I've discussed, goes by the pseudonym Goel, and he's done, my gosh, deep research. He has gone so deep, and I've just been amazed by what he has produced. But I mentioned on an earlier episode that he was doing a private investigation, and he was hired by someone to corroborate the claims of the Hamblin sisters. So yes, The article describes Benions having a defamation lawsuit against him and also Jason and Alexia Preston, who I've mentioned before, of We Are the People Utah, for essentially discussing the victim impact statement with Goel on their podcast. And it's interesting because Goel and Alexia and Jason, they didn't write the victim impact statement. They just got a hold of it, kind of like everyone else has. And if I'm not mistaken, it was actually Nicholas Rossi or Arthur Knight who originally leaked the victim impact statement. I'm still trying to figure out if anybody is suing him. I haven't seen anything, but I will keep an eye out. And if anyone has any idea, please let me know. But there also was an injunction filed by the Benions against a man named Ken Krogh. They discuss this in the article. And I believe Ken Krogh was the one who hired Goel to investigate these claims in the first place so he could turn over his findings to the church. Now, the injunction was granted, but recently Krogh has challenged it in court and the matter was still pending. But I gotta say, I was frankly stunned by this article. For an unsubstantiated, or let's say an unverified victim impact statement, and by me saying that, it's not me saying I don't believe it, because I believe the Hamblin daughters, but legally it's unverified. And in this article, they actually cite specific instances from that 150-page plus document, not all of the allegations, but a handful of them, and they are very graphic. And I'm like, hello, the entire world doesn't actually have access to this document, and a lot of people probably didn't even know it existed. So the fact that they voluntarily were the ones to put all of that out there is a very questionable decision to me. I personally would not want to go through all of the details and deny what they've called verbatim from the article, quote, an array of acts so bizarre and heinous as to hardly be plausible, end quote. Why would you even bring these up if they aren't plausible? At one point, they go into a previous court filing about how a certain incident involving an alleged homicide of a young boy couldn't have happened because of the alleged location described, and people would have heard or seen something. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why are you even bringing this up? Especially since you have said it was too heinous to even be possible. Here is just some unsolicited advice. Don't do something like this again. Why would you draw attention back onto yourselves? Just move on. Now, I'll remind you, the Benions, they haven't been charged with anything. They aren't people of interest. They say they're victims of harassment. They say their property has been egged. They said someone drove a truck leaving tire marks over their front lawn. They saw a drone on their property. I mean, I would think that police reports should have been filed over these instances. But again, I just wouldn't bring all of this up. I would not be playing victim amid all of this madness. In my opinion, it is not a good look when you have real alleged survivors like ES and TS, and their cases are seemingly being flushed down the toilet in Utah County. They should be the focus here. Now, I'm going to introduce something to you all called statement analysis, and not everyone believes in this. It's based on expert opinions who have trained in statement analysis and deception. However, statement experts are called in on different criminal cases by law enforcement, and sometimes even law enforcement is trained in statement analysis and deception to help solve cases. These people do an incredible job of deciphering what they believe to be lies within truths or vice versa. Now, because this article is out there for the public to see, with public denials from Joe Benion on what he's been accused of, it is my right to have an opinion, and it is my right to seek out an expert opinion. So in no way am I encouraging any type of harassment towards anyone, but I find this type of analysis very, very interesting. And again, this is based on opinions. Some people believe in it and some people don't. But I use my friend Paul Maillardet, who is a criminal statement analyst and former director of Truth Unlocked, to walk me through just some general statements when it comes to denials. And some of this doesn't even have to be specific to Joe Benion's denial at all. It really can just be signals for investigators to dig further when they see statements like this. And in my opinion, the best part about statement analysis is that the analyst doesn't want to know anything about the case or the story or the situation. They just want to analyze the words, which is how Paul likes to work. But yes, is context important in criminal cases? Absolutely, which is why no one is ever convicted on statement analysis alone. You can't determine anything conclusively on statement analysis. Duh. So, okay, let's get to it. The phrase, quote, "to my knowledge," this phrase in general, there is a section where Benion says, "To my knowledge, there was never a satanic church or group in Spring City." Paul states, quote, "The use of 'to my knowledge' piques my interest here. The reason for this is that this type of response comes up within answers from politicians. On the face of things, this appears to be a solid response, but it allows for either information, which could be claimed was told, but could also be refuted somehow, because that's only to his knowledge. To his knowledge, none of this was happening. But to someone else's knowledge, maybe it did happen." So in general, it's a more political denial. You see politicians use this a lot, and saying that phrase makes an allowance that there may be more knowledge out there. So in general, that phrase weakens denials from, again, a general perspective. And I hope you are all still with me. I know that's a lot of words, so take a minute and think about that. And also, you know, I love statement analysis because it really makes me think about the way I speak and the way I write. And I've sat in training courses with people like Paul and the amazing Peter Hyatt and also Jack Fox. And it's interesting because they all say that it's very difficult to lie. Something that sticks out to me is now when I see that a child goes missing or a baby goes missing and the mother or the father is on the news begging for help, begging for the public to help find their missing child. Sometimes, and I think about this in the case of Quentin Simon, who was the little boy who was killed by his mother in Georgia. When he went missing, his mother, Leilani, went on the news and said something like, "that baby." She called him "that baby" when she was asking for help. And actually, Patsy Ramsey also said this about JonBenet. She referred to her as "that child." And if you really hone in on statement analysis, that's distancing language. You're putting a distance there between you and your child. And that doesn't always mean that you're guilty of doing something to them, but it definitely means that you have some kind of guilty knowledge where you want to distance. So in Leilani's case, she was found guilty of murdering her sweet toddler. And JonBenet, well, that's another story that we can get into for another day. But let's move on here. So Joe then says, quote, "I have never been involved in any kind of abuse of people, children, men, women, sexual, or otherwise." He adds, "The allegations that have been made are just not true. The only crime I am guilty of is being someone's friend," referring to David Hamblin. "I was friends with the wrong person." Paul noted for this statement, quote, "It would be useful to know if the reporter asked any questions which may have led using the order and use of what he goes on to deny. If not, he is denying what he has heard and choosing his own priority in the order he uses. So if we follow this, A, people, B, children, C, men, D, women. Is this case primarily child abuse? Then he chooses, quote, people first, which would minimize the priority allegation from his perspective, personally and professionally. Kids, of course, are people, but it minimizes their vulnerability. Paul goes on to quote his phrase, "The allegations made are just not true." If the allegations being made are directed at him, then his use of, quote, "the allegations made," again, is a subtle minimization, making them more generic rather than directed at him in his mind. Quote, "I have never been involved," is a broad stroke denial. But when we analyze things in statement analysis, we explore that everyone has their own personal subjective dictionary. So a question I would ask is, quote, "When you say you weren't involved, what do you mean?" Does he mean he knew nothing about it, or is he claiming that he wasn't actively involved? This doesn't mean he was involved, but subjects who have involvement will seek to minimize their actions, and this will feed into their response. And then he says, a side note for you, Lauren, there are some who will claim that the use of the word just, he says, just not true, is seen in deceptive accounts. This is a very complicated word which must have the context analyzed. So here, it could suggest that he has a need to persuade that they are just not true. In some circumstances, the use of just can compare one thought with another. It can also speak to time. Anything using the word just needs careful evaluation. Okay, I use the word just all the time. This is me, Lauren. I just wanted to bring awareness around this case. It's a very natural word for me to use, so maybe Joe is just the same way, or maybe not. Okay, moving on. Quote, "The only crime I am guilty of is being someone's friend," referring to David Hamblin. "I was friends with the wrong person," end quote. So here he avoids using Hamblin's name and places Hamblin within a group of people, hiding him within the crowd, someone's friend. In doing so, he is suggesting that Hamblin was not a special friend. He is seemingly conscious of or clever enough to do this. He doesn't use, for example, David, which could be perceived as a warmer relationship. Also, he is someone's friend. Hamblin is not his friend, suggesting the dynamic was more Hamblin having him as a friend and not the other way around. He is definitely distancing himself from Hamblin. Friends is now in the past tense. So what's interesting is that while he's very aware of his words, he considers Hamblin having been a friend a crime. So he associates Hamblin with crime. I don't know if Hamblin has just been charged, if he's facing or has had trial, or if he's been found guilty. But if he hasn't been found guilty, then Joe either believes or possibly knows that Hamblin is guilty. Despite having been a friend, he doesn't ever suggest that Hamblin could be innocent. In summary, while these denials aren't necessarily 100% reliable denials in my opinion, it doesn't mean they're deceptive. With that said, in his political professional denial, this is weakened by the quote, "to my knowledge." Paul goes on to say that something that he would have expected Joe to say was that all of these allegations or whatever was going on with Hamblin would come as a complete shock or surprise to him. He should have been shocked that his friend could be accused of such horrible things or potentially allegedly carried out such horrific acts, but that is just not there anywhere. And as a reminder, Paul knows nothing about this case. So it's very possible that because Hamblin was arrested in 2012, that Joe is just not shocked by any of these allegations anymore. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm trying to check all the boxes here. But Paul says at the end of his analysis, 90% of deception is omission. We always look to see what they're not saying. So again, that was Paul Maillardet's analysis based on his expert opinion. Take it for what it is. And I always find these so fascinating and so interesting. And yeah, Paul knows nothing about the case. No allegations against Hamblin. He knows nothing about anyone or anything that was mentioned in the victim impact statement. This is his opinion, and this is his opinion based on words alone. But guys, there is so much more to dig into here. It's truly overwhelming. And I also want to express my gratitude to those who have felt comfortable enough to reach out to me, share your story, share any information that you have. And thank you for your patience as I sort through everything and I continue to learn and go down this awful rabbit hole. It is just awful. And my prayers are with everybody who has been affected by things that are going on in Utah County right now. And I will stick with this story. I will do my very best to stick with it, provide updates on the cases, speak to experts and hopefully witnesses. And yeah, I'll be here. So with that said, everyone, thank you again for listening. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and I'll be back soon with more from Utah County.